Alright, well, I'm back to do another one of these, one of my videos here. It has been a while since I've done this, so it's been probably about a month since I've done it. And what you're seeing right here, this tree that I'm got my camera propped on, you can see these leaves here. Maybe you see they've all died, and they're hanging on here. They haven't fallen off yet, but just a matter of time. And most of these other trees, you can't see any of them. I can look around me and see them. I'll show them to you maybe in here in a minute when I get done with this. But you can see all the leaves have fallen off. The last time I did one, I showed a picture of, or showed it kind of in the video of all the trees with the leaves still on them, all the colors of purple and red and yellow and orange and so forth. But not now. Now they're all gone. Now they're all here on the ground. And in spite of the fact that this is kind of in the middle of December, it's just a few days till Christmas, as I'm filming this, it's kind of cool out. It's not freezing cold out right now, but it is kind of cold out. But there's still a bunch of bugs flying around. So if you see me doing this a bunch, you know why. It's because it's almost as bad as it was in the summertime. I'm not sweating or anything today, but the bugs are out. And today is the 21st of December when I'm doing this filming, and so Christmas is just 4 days away, I guess now. Today's Wednesday, and Christmas will be this coming Sunday. One of those rare times that Christmas falls on a Sunday. So there's that this year. We'll have that. But I'm not going to talk about Christmas right now. I may talk about it in some videos in the next few days. But for right now, I'm not going to talk about that. I want to go back to talking about what I talked about before in some of the recent videos that I've done when I've been doing this and not showing you my walking. It's like I said, it's about a month ago that I think that I did the last one. Was I talked about creation, and I talked a little bit about it. You can go back and watch the prior video that I did on this. I talked about this, and just let me tell you, the way you're seeing this camera's kind of turned here. It's just the way I've got it set up. Like the one I did before, I don't have a tripod or anything. I've got it sitting in a tree, and it's just the way. This is sort of the best angle I could get at it. So it's sort of the best I can do on this. I actually will see if I can. Now I can zoom. That's as far as I can zoom to make it any bigger. So like I say, I will show some more of this here in a little bit. My surroundings. You may be able to hear the water behind me because the creek is just right back over here. You can't see it because the camera's tilted up, but you'll be able to see it here in a minute. So as I said, I want to go back and talk about creation, and obviously when we talk about it, the text we think about the most is in the book of Genesis. And the one that we obviously think about the most is the first verse of Genesis, the very first verse of the Bible, which says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Different versions will translate that slightly differently, but that's generally what most versions how they have translated it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Just to show off a little bit and show you how little bit of Hebrew that I know. In Hebrew, that is pronounced roughly like this: Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim vet haaretz. That's 7 words in Hebrew, and when I say roughly translated, it's in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So that seems basic enough as far as what Genesis tells us there in the opening verse. And then you've got, of course, the following verses with the 6 days of creation and the resting on the Sabbath day. These things, this is one of the parts of creation I don't care for as much as these gnats flying around. They do serve a purpose, but at any rate, the first verse of Genesis, it's how that's interpreted is a little bit, and how it connects with the rest of the chapter, or the first chapter. Now remember, in the original languages and the original writings as we have them, there are no chapters and verses. Those are Those are put in by man later. And but nonetheless, that's looked at as the first. We put it as the first verse, and it's generally accepted that it does stand alone by itself. But there is some interesting questions as to how does it relate to the rest of the chapter, and let's just say even to the next verse, verse 2, which says, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving on the face of the waters." And then verse 3, "And God said, let there be light, and there was light." So there's some interesting, I don't want to say theories, but views, however you want to put it, as to how Genesis 1:1 relates to Genesis 1:2 and so forth and so on. There's a couple that see them sees it connected, that sees the couple of verses, verses all connected together. And there's a couple that kind of see them as being separate. And so I want to talk about some of those. And the reason this is not an easy thing to settle is because there's problems with each one of those views. And so just to get into it, just when we look at first some of the ones that see them as, shall we say, as joined, see them joined together. Something crawling on the camera there. One of the ones that sees them joined together sees them, the first verse as, well, actually I'm going to start with the ones that see them separate. Let's start with that first. The ones that see them separate, one that sees the Genesis 1:1 as sort of a title. In other words, it's not actually part of the action, the plot, if you will. It's more of the title. Like if I was writing an article or something and you see the headline, the title, you just read that as the title of what's coming in the article, and then the beginning of the article is actually, the next thing under, wherever that's the title of the article is. You'd see whatever the headline might be, and then you go to the first paragraph of the article, and that's where the article actually starts. It's not the title of the article itself. And there's some, and this is a fairly common view, that view Genesis 1:1 as a, it's not that this is the first thing that happens. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, but it's a sort of a summary statement of what's coming afterwards. In other words, it's a one way of saying it's compacted into one sentence, 7 words in Hebrew, as I said, 10 words in our English language. But it's kind of compacted there. This is what you're going to read about in these next few verses. And actually, when you get to the end, because that first section is usually thought up to end, and I didn't bring my Bible with me, so I can't point exactly to the verse, but I believe it's Genesis 2:3, 2:4, where it talks about, and this is the how it was sort of when God created the heavens and the earth. I'm not quoting that exactly right, but when it gets to the end of it, it summarizes it again. There was an old way we were taught. I remember years ago in speech class being told one of the things to do when you're giving a speech is tell people what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And it's sort of that idea that that's what you have with Genesis. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You tell them what you're going to tell them. Then it goes through the 6 days of creation into the Sabbath rest. And it said, and this is the generations, I believe how it puts it, when God created the heavens and the earth. Or that's, I'm not, like I say, I'm not quoting it exactly right. It's in Genesis 2 in the first few verses, but it's sort of that idea. You tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, then you tell them what you told them. Okay, so that's one possible theory, and that's you read quite a few commentators and so forth on Genesis, and that's their view of it. That this view is that this verse, Genesis 1:1, is just a sort of a summary statement, or it's telling you what's about to happen in these next verses. It's the 6 days of creation sort of put into one sentence, into one verse. So that's one way of looking at it. The problem with that one, let me just talk about that for a moment. The problem with that particular theory is when you get to the second verse, it says, and say that that's where the action actually begins. It doesn't begin with verse 1. That's just a summary statement of everything that comes afterwards. So it begins in verse 2, and it says, and the earth was without form and void. Well, you get to verse 2, and you've already got the earth. Genesis 1:1 tells us he created heaven and earth, but that's not where it begins. If it actually begins in verse 2, then where did the earth come from? Because it's already here. It just says the earth was without form and void. So there's where it sort of creates a problem, because you don't actually see earth then being created. Earth is just already here when we get to verse 2. So while that's possible that that's true, it has that problem with it, that where did the earth come from? Because we don't see earth here. We don't see the earth being created. It just starts out with, and the earth was without form and void. There's no creation of earth. There's no creation of the earth. It's just already there. We can assume it was created, but it doesn't tell us that then. And we see everything else being created, but the earth itself we wouldn't see being created if the action actually begins at verse 2. So that's that one theory, and there's kind of the problem with it. Another theory, or what we might call a view of it, that sees the distinction between verse 1 and verse 2 is what's commonly called the gap theory. If you've read of this over the years, I'm not going to take a lot of time explaining it, but to say this is a common view that's been held over the years. It's not as common now as it once was, but at one time it was fairly accepted by quite a few people. And still there are those that do hold to it. And probably the Bible that's the most famous for holding to it, if you have a Scofield reference Bible, Scofield's Bible was obviously very popular at one time, and still a lot of people do use it. You'll see in there that this was his view, that it says between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2 that there is a huge gap, not a grammatical gap like the previous view was, but a time gap of maybe a few years, maybe millions of years. But it says Genesis 1:1 was the original creation, and it is actually a statement. It's not a summary statement, but it's a statement of what happened in the way distant past. God created the heavens and the earth, and then there's that time period between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 of who knows how many years. It could be hundreds, it could be billions, but there's a great time period between them. And then Genesis 2, they actually interpret not as, and the earth was without form and void, but the earth became without form and void. That something happened between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2 that caused the earth, which was created in verse 1, to be without form and void. And this is, this is the general idea of what happened. Was a rebellion led by the angel that we now call Satan. And they interpret Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 to be Satan's rebellion. There's other people who aren't gap theorists who also interpret Isaiah and Ezekiel that way as well. But for gap theorists, it's very important that it be that. So they interpret that, and then there was this big judgment that happened upon the earth. Most of them will say that's when the dinosaurs were here, and some of the other things that we discovered in, archaeology and so forth. They say that's when all that happened, was during that first Earth age, if you will. And right now we're in the second one. That's how most of them would tend to look at that. And then Genesis 1:2 on is a recreation. It's a recreation of Earth and of all the things that we have now. Sometimes this view is called the ruin restoration theory of creation, because the idea that it was ruined because of man, or not man, but Satan, the one who became Satan, and his angels and whatever creatures were here because of their rebellion, and that doomed this, sort of like what happened with Noah later on, but it happened long before that. And then the recreation began with verse 2 and so forth. Okay, well, that's one theory. And like I said, Scofield Bible popularized it, and there are others who've held to that view also, besides just Scofield. And it's still held by some today. But there are quite a few problems with it. For one thing, what I just mentioned at the end of verse 2, or excuse me, end of chapter 2 rather, or not the end of, beginning of chapter 2, it talks about this being the time when God created the heavens and the earth. So this was not, it does not say a recreation, it actually harkens back to Genesis 1:1, which would be the actual creation, meaning what happened before was the same thing as what Genesis 1:1 was talking about. There's also some other problems with it, one of which being when Jesus talks about marriage in the New Testament, he says God from the beginning made them male and female and said that a man will leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife. Well, that's talking about the original creation. That's not talking, it says it happened at the beginning. So that cannot be the beginning then that they have as being something that happened as opposed to this current creation. They would have it being something different. So that's a problem, and among other things, with that view, the ruin and restoration. So those are the two views that sort of view Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2 as being separate. Now, there are, I did not believe these bugs were going to be that big of a problem today, as cold as it is, but they're out here making their presence known. Now, the other views, I said, would be the ones that connect them together. And some would view Genesis 1:1 as being the start of what we would call the first day of creation. That we read about, when it says in the first day and the second day, third day and fourth day. And that part when it gets down to the fourth day, they would say that includes, it started at Genesis 1:1. It didn't start at Genesis 1:2, it started at Genesis 1:1. And so what you have in Genesis 1:1 is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and so forth, and everything you read, it's just going chronologically up until it says that the evening and the morning were the first day. And so that was part of the first day. Well, the problem with that theory is, and that's held by some as well, is that when we see actually it talks about the heavens and the earth being created, if that was done on the first day, the problem is when you read further into in that chapter, into the subsequent days, you'll find that's when the heavens, the heavenly bodies and so forth were created. They weren't created on the first day. So that sort of tells us that one's got a lot of problems. If that's part of what happens on the first day, well, the problem is that you have the heavenly bodies being created on another day. So that creates a problem for that view. Then there's another view that views them as being sort of as one. And that's one that it interprets verse 1 a little bit differently than the way that I have been translating it to you. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it will translate it usually something like this, that in the beginning, when God began to create the heavens and earth, or something like when God began to create the heavens and the earth, excuse me, or as I said, when in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, or in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth, or something like that. Now you can see in English we commonly refer to this, the difference between dependent and independent clauses. If I say I came out here today to make a video, or I came out here today and made a video, okay, that statement's an independent clause. It stands on its own. It doesn't need any other explanation. You're not waiting for me to say something else that finishes that thought. That's a thought in and of itself. But if I add a word to that, I say, when I came out here today to film this video, and then you're thinking, what? I could say, when I came out here today to film this video, the gnats became a real problem. See, but if I just say, when I came out here today to film this video, you sort of leaves you hanging for something more. You're thinking something more needs to be added to that. Well, if I say, when in the beginning God created the heaven and earth, I'm waiting for something else to be there. I'm waiting, so that next part has to be, in the terms of grammar, it has to be connected to it. So I can say, when in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, then the earth was without form and void. Darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the waters. God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Somewhere in there you see the completed thought of that. That it's not saying, that's not an absolute statement of, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. That's just a sort of a clause that leads us in to what's coming afterwards. But it has also another problem with it. One of the same problems that I said the original one had, of the view that it was a summary statement, because we still don't have the earth being created. It says, when God began to create the heaven and the earth was without form and void. Well, there again, we have the earth's already here. It's not actually created itself, it's just already here. So where did it come from? There again, it's not, in that view, you don't have that either. So as I say, all of these views have their own problems, but I would say that the first view and the last view. Now, the last view is dependent on how the Hebrew of that verse is read, and some read it that way, and some have read it as an absolute statement, an independent clause by itself. It doesn't really. I'm not going to get into the whole issue of that at the moment. But both of the first one I mentioned, the idea of it being an absolute statement standing alone, and the last one of it being sort of a dependent clause. The first one being an absolute statement, and also being a sort of a summary, a pre-summary statement, I guess you could say, preliminary statement, however you want to put it. Both of them have the problem of we don't have the earth actually being created. Even though that's what it says in the verse, we don't actually see it, because when we get to the next verse, earth's already there. So it kind of creates that problem. But I'm going to say this as well, in that it only creates a problem for some of us in our thinking. There's a view of creation that's widely held, and this is not to say that it's right or wrong here. It's just to say it's widely held. That's known by the Latin phrase creatio ex nihilo, and I'm probably not even pronouncing that right, but it's but the word creatio or creatio, or it's creatio, means creation. It's just the word creation. It's the Latin word. It just doesn't have the N on the end of it like our word does. And ex nihilo means from nothing or out of nothing. The idea that there was nothing, and then everything that is was created from that. Well, what I'm going to say on this is, that's not to say that that view is right or wrong, but I'm going to say it's not to say Genesis doesn't teach that, but I'm going to say that the writers of Genesis just don't care about that. I should say the writer. I'll presume it to be Moses, or Moses may have been a later editor that put it all together, but nevertheless, we'll say Moses. In the original readers of it, for that matter as well, there still was not an issue that concerned them. Like, well, where did the earth itself come from? Where did if it was created out of something that was pre-existing, it wasn't created out of nothing. Where did that pre-existing stuff come from? Well, those are things that we tend to worry about today, or it tends to be things that we think about a lot. It was not something that the Bible writers thought a whole lot about. It wasn't something they cared that much about. It's something in our philosophical minds we spend a lot of time wondering about and worrying about, and those sort of things. The writers of the Bible didn't. Those were sort of issues they didn't think about like we do. They were asking different questions than we were. And one of the things I want to go on to, regardless of which view you hold to on this, is to understand what the purpose of the Bible writers were, and what the purpose of what Genesis said is this. It was not to answer some of these philosophical questions that we have today, because they're modern questions. They're not questions they thought about. But also, the question that what this pointed out to them, or the purpose of saying this to them, was to point out that everything you see around you, there's a couple of things I want to say on this. One, everything you see around you was created. whether created out of nothing or out of something pre-existing. We know man was created out of something pre-existing. So that's not, beyond the realm of what creation can mean. But everything was created by God. So the idea that, as some people in the ancient world did, right now the sun's shining from this way at me, some people worship the sun. It's sort of understandable why they would, and some worship the moon and the stars, and some worship various animals, and I've got this propped on a tree here. Some people worship trees. But the idea of Genesis was to show the trees, the animals, the sun, the moon, the stars, the whales of the sea, the fish of the sea, the cattle of the ground, and so forth. All these things that people worshiped, there's something greater than them. There was something that created them. There's something that made them. There was some, or should I say better, there was someone who did it. So that was the purpose of Genesis. It wasn't to answer a lot of the questions that we have, but it was to show the people, because they lived in a world where people worshipped, they worshipped creation and not the Creator. And it was to show that there's one who's greater. There's one who is greater than the calf and the cow that Israel was known to worship themselves. Remember in the Exodus. And there's one greater than the sun, the moon, and the stars. There's one greater than the fish of the sea. There were a lot of ancient religions that worshipped the various fish of the sea, and they worshipped the eagle and the hawk and so forth. They said there's one who's greater than all that, the one who made all of them. So it's to show Israel, that there is one who is greater than all of them, or not just to Israel, but then for Israel to show everyone else that there's one greater than all of these things that you are worshiping. There's one who is greater than all of that. So that was the purpose of Genesis, not to answer the questions that we, have about all of that. But also, I want to state another thing on that, and I'll finish with this before I'll show you some of the stuff around here. But another thing was to show. We told, creation, they said, and it was good. God created something and it was good. It was to show God actually is concerned about matter. And a good part of the ancient world, the view of the gods, where they really weren't all that concerned about man. I mentioned this before, that is one of the things that, in the previous video I did on this, to show that one of the things that we're told is that creation was intentional, that God did it on purpose. It was designed. It was not accidental. It showed God was involved with the creation. There were some early Christian, and I'm using that word lightly there, but there were some early heresies within the church that actually viewed the I don't like the way this sounds, but I'm gonna have to say it this way, that viewed the God of the New Testament and the God of the Old Testament as two different gods. Sometimes people still, unfortunately, will say stuff like that. But they viewed them as two different gods. The God of the Old Testament was the God who created the world and all these sort of things, and it was different than the God of the New Testament, than the one who was the Father of Jesus. They were two different gods, and that matter was evil, and this was the creation of the evil God. There were some heretics that taught that, but obviously the New Testament, when we read it, you can see they believed still that the God who had sent Jesus, the God who came incarnate as Jesus, as we're about to celebrate at Christmas time here, was the God of the Old Testament. It was the God who created all these things. As I just mentioned a moment ago, Jesus talked about that God originally had created man, male and female, and so forth. And throughout the New Testament, there's all the references to the God as the creator. So that was clearly, obviously not true. The God of the New Testament was the creator God of the Old Testament. So it shows that all of this, the earth, the animals and so forth, they had a creator, and that they were the product of a good God. So that's the questions I think that Genesis was trying to answer, not some of the modern, more philosophical questions that we have come up with about that. Now I may talk some more about creation in the future, or I may go on to some other things. I may explain some of these things more. or I may not. It kind of depends on where I feel about doing it in the future, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. I do hope to do in the next couple of days something about Christmas time as well. But for the moment, I do want to, like I said here, to show where I'm at here. And I don't know, sometimes this thing will cut off around 30 minutes, so it won't be much longer than this will probably be on here. But just show you where I'm at here. And as I said, you can see seeing the trees here. They are leafless now. And there's the water. We've had some rain recently, so it has picked up a little bit. Well, I'm going to cut off the video now, and hope everybody has a blessed day. And if I don't do anything else before Christmas, which I hope to, but if I don't, I hope everybody has a blessed and Merry Christmas. Have a blessed day. Talk to you later.